Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. Today's solo flight special is being captained by Randy Wright. Ground traffic control has moved us to the departure lane, and we will be taking off shortly. Please return all seat backs to their original position, and ensure that all tray tables are stowed in the locked and upright position. Now fasten your seat belts. Kick back, relax, and enjoy the show as we soar above the friendly airwaves in comfort and style. Once again, we thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. This is your captain speaking, and I would like to take this opportunity to personally welcome you to this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. We know you have a choice when it comes to your radio listening pleasure, and would like to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. What's more, we are confident that no other radio program or venue will fly you over the friendly airwaves at as much comfort and style, nor leave you with an indelible yet pure sense of enlightenment quite like we can here at the Wright Flyer. Now that you're aboard, please be seated, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show. We've taxied to the departure lane and are awaiting takeoff clearance from air traffic control. While they go through that mindless, bureaucratic red tape and regimentation, I'm going to go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist because there is a lot of news and information to get to before I may indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, what do we know about what happened at San Bernardino, California? In yesterday's Solo Flight Special Edition, I mentioned that it sounded a lot like some sort of Islamo-fascist plot. It just seemed well too organized to be in line with all of the other so-called mass shootings that have occurred in the United States this year. And we could see that because when you look at what Dylan Storm Roof did back at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in South Carolina in June of 2015, he didn't have a well-orchestrated plan quite like what we saw unfurl in San Bernardino yesterday. When you look at the Umpqua Community College shooting, again, it was also not as well orchestrated or organized as this. And also, the Roanoke, Virginia shooter, Vester Flanagan, who shot his former colleagues on live television, also didn't seem to have the amount of planning, sophistication, and, let's face it, improvised explosive devices that this attack did. In fact, this was more akin to what we saw occur in Paris, France, back a couple weeks ago, and what the Chechnyan Mario brothers, the Tsarnaevs, did in Boston back in 2013. That is the truth that we have to face here, and therefore the pattern that we are seeing here, which is a clear and undeniable pattern, is that Islamofascism is involved. And we can really see that because we now know who the two terrorists were. One was Saeed Rizwan Farouk, who was born in Illinois and raised in Southern California. He was 28 years old, and his wife, who is from Saudi Arabia, is Tashfeen Malik. And she married Saeed supposedly in Saudi Arabia and then was brought back to the United States. In either case, both the couple had traveled to Saudi Arabia, and she is actually originally from there. So what we are seeing is, yes, there is a connection to a Sunni sect, which is what ISIS is based off of and rooted in, and it is all tying into what is happening here. Despite this, Obama has attempted to claim that this could be both workplace violence and terrorism. Really? We're going to go back down the line of the Major Nadal Hassan Fort Hood shooting reasoning by the government in an attempt to insult the intelligence of decent, hardworking American citizens, and once again try and say that when these Islamo-fascists carry out these sorts of well-orchestrated attacks designed to attack the very national character, spirit, heritage, and above all, identity of the American people, that this is somehow workplace violence? Yes, it is true that Saeed Farouk worked at the Inland Regional Facility, and it was said that he was basically the equivalent to a restaurant health inspector, and that he had worked there for a number of years. And they're trying to say that because he had worked there for a number of years, this is just not completely related to your typical Islamo-fascist terrorism. This, again, folks, is an example of the government failing to keep up with the actual intelligence that is present, and that is that when you look at the style of terrorism that is purported and supported by the Islamic State or ISIS or ISIL or whatever name you want to give them, they have openly and actively come out and said that they would support any individual lone wolf style attack and consider that a part of the group. And as we all recall, in the immediate aftermath of the carnage and chaos which was unleashed upon the good citizens of San Bernardino, California, the terrorist group ISIS rushed out to social media sites like Twitter to proclaim their victory and celebration of these dastardly deeds that were carried out by these husband and wife terrorists. And it really is terrorism. I know that the federal government is trying to go out on a limb and say that we just don't have all the facts yet, but because the Federal Bureau of Investigation is involved in this incident, as opposed to allowing it to be handled by local law enforcement as a standard murder investigation and prosecution would be, the feds are involved. And that automatically brings me to the conclusion that this is an incident of terrorism. There really can be no doubt about it, because when you look at the amount of carnage that they were able to carry out, the gear that they had, the amount of meticulous planning that went into the incident itself, and the fact that these people have contacts with Saudi Arabia, which, it must be remembered, is the country where Osama bin Laden, the mastermind of the 9/11 terrorist attacks some 14 years ago, was from. It just is there. I mean, the circumstantial evidence is to such a degree that it would be ludicrous to deny that there is any connection between what is happening in California, or rather what has happened in California, and Islamo-fascist terrorism. But we see that the doctrine of political correctness has blinded the federal government to this truth. They don't want to go out and claim what this really is. And I've said that this has been a major problem plaguing the United States, both in foreign policy and domestic policy, ever since Obama assumed the reins of power back in January of 2009. He does not want to go out on a limb and call out Islamo-fascist terrorists for who and what they really are. Instead, he would rather point out to the American citizens and claim that, look, there is an undeniable pattern here of gun violence in the United States that is unparalleled anywhere else in the world. And yet nothing could be further from the truth. He is actually going to sit there and claim that the attacks in Paris didn't happen. That just doesn't make any sense at all. And, it's disingenuous in all forms, shapes, and facets, because this happened just a little over 2 weeks ago and marked the worst attacks on French soil since the dark days of the Second World War. And yet President Obama is going to continue to go down this line of attempting to strip decent, law-abiding American citizens of their fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms. In fact, I even have the sound clip from what Obama said yesterday when the attacks were still underway.
And we have a pattern now of mass shootings in this country that has no parallel anywhere else in the world.
Stop and think about that, folks. He said that we have a pattern of mass shootings in America that has no parallel on Earth. Well, yes, I can think of the parallels. In Paris, France, there was this most recent dastardly attack. And then, as we recall, during the summer, there was the attack on the French commuter train in which three American servicemen finally subdued the Islamo-fascist terrorist. Then there was also the Charlie Hebdo shooting. So let's pause and think about this for a moment, folks. Is this really a claim that the United States of America is the only one that has been subjected to radical Islamist fundamentalists? And it's even more than that, because the so-called moderate Muslims really have not come out to say anything against the Islamo-fascists who are attacking everything that is good and decent about Western culture. We have to wake up to this reality and discard this cancerous doctrine of political correctness, which is killing us as a nation. Of course, the other thing that we have to realize is that firearms are not the problem. Firearms wouldn't have done this on their own. The problem is with these Islamo-fascists who have proactively come out and declared war on the United States of America simply because we do not buy into Sharia law values or Islamic traditions. And that is the type of twisted medieval philosophy that we are having to face. And we have to actually admit the truth that these people have become sworn enemies of the United States. They have declared their war against America and her people over 20 years ago, going back to the first World Trade Center bombings. And again, we see that under these radical extremist left-wing progressives, we have fallen back into the failed mindset that gave us 9/11. This idea that it can be treated only as a criminal issue, a legal issue, and not to address it as war. Because when you actually look at what ISIS and Al-Qaeda and all of these other various terrorist organizations have said, they claim they want to annihilate the United States and to eradicate Western influence on the modern world. There is no way around what they have preached. Yet this idiotic and moronic doctrine of political correctness has plunged us into a truly disgusting weakness that is just being displayed to the entire world. And it cannot be denied that the doctrine has weakened us, that it has emboldened and empowered these Islamo-fascists who want nothing more than the complete annihilation of our shared United States Constitution and the natural law tenets that underpin that entire document. As Jeremy and I have frequently reiterated on past episodes of the Wright Flyer, we have to embrace our fundamental and unalienable rights in order to defend ourselves. When the United States of America is under attack, we should not be rushing out to demand the confiscation of firearms or the prohibition of purchasing certain style firearms, or attempt to label decent gun-owning American citizens who wish to preserve their fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms as some sort of nut jobs. But that is exactly what this regime is doing. And once again, it just proves that the Obama regime and the president himself are diametrically opposed to the best interests of America and her people. And that is a shocking reality that we must come to grips with and to terms with. We cannot and should not bow and capitulate to their demands to further weaken us in the face of these Islamo-fascist terrorists who are going all out on their attacks on the decent American citizens. We just cannot allow them to have their way, because if we do, then we are handing victory over to these malicious barbarians who have no desire to assimilate, no desire to become part of our country, and just want to utilize our freedoms to destroy us. That is what they are attempting to do, and President Obama is playing right along with their game. And another thing that comes to mind is, why do we want to open the floodgate to these so-called Syrian refugees who already have a proven track record of being associated with groups like ISIS, and we know that groups like ISIS will attempt to utilize that situation to their benefit, and it would definitely work to the detriment of the United States and its interests, both abroad and at home. But Obama is ignoring this. Indeed, the entire radical extremist left-wing government and proponents of the left wing are ignoring this vital truth. Instead, they want to embrace things like claiming that the hoax of man-made global warming has somehow caused terrorism. And, it's really shocking to hear them say this. And Bernie Sanders had actually mentioned this in one of the Democrat debates. In fact, I think I've even got the soundbite of that here, and I'm going to go ahead and bring that up for you right now.
Absolutely. In fact, climate change is directly related to the growth of terrorism. And if we do not get our act together and listen to what the scientists say, you're going to see countries all over the world. This is what the CIA says. They're going to be struggling over limited amounts of water, limited amounts of land to grow their crops, and you're going to see all kinds of international conflict.
Give me a break, folks. There is no way that Islamo-fascist terrorism is caused or created by global warming. This is nonsense. We have seen throughout the annals of history that those who adhere to the prophet of the sword have been unable to coexist with other religious groups. In fact, the entire purpose of what Muhammad did, and the reason that he received the moniker of prophet of the sword, is that he desired to spread the word of Islam via violence. He would actually go and sack places and destroy entire communities if they refused to submit. And as I have said on past episodes of The Wright Flyer, Islam actually means to submit to the will of Allah. So how does that have anything to do with supposed drought conditions in the Middle East, or lack of food caused by the deflation of the globe, or the magic warming of the skies, when in fact, when you actually look at the evidence, it has come to light that many groups have actually been fudging the numbers in order to make it appear as though there is a warming trend, when in fact there has been no warming in well over a decade. And therefore, what we're seeing with this is just that they are ignoring the cyclical trends that have been established throughout history and are trying to conflate humanity to such a position that we somehow can alter the entire climate of the world. It just doesn't make any sense. It's a bunch of hubris, and it's an attempt to force utopian socialist policies down the throats of freedom-loving people all around the world. And remember that we here in the United States are the last bastion of liberty and freedom. We are supposed to be a shining light for those who wish to escape the dire and abject misery of utopian socialism. As the late Margaret Thatcher said, socialism just spreads misery for everyone. And the problem with it is that when you run out of somebody else's money, you just can't sustain the entire system. But even though the president has called for gun control, he still won't label these Islamo-fascist terrorists as the realistic and unquestionable threat that they pose to the United States, and indeed that they are to the United States. And like I said, the problem isn't with firearms. It is with the fact that these Islamo-fascists are here in this country, preparing to carry out more attacks of this nature, and they will stop at nothing to deprive us of our Western culture and way of life. And what's even worse is that Obama wants to bring more of these types of people into the country. Remember that the terrorists also were constructing explosive devices within their homes. This is the type of stuff that ISIS does. And we know that ISIS has infiltrated Syria. We know that they are a branch of Sunni Islam. We know that all of the so-called refugees that Obama is bringing into this country are adherents to the Sunni faith. We know that in Turkey, several terrorists claiming to be refugees were detained at an airport, and they were attempting to make their way to the United States. And we know that the FBI has already come out and said that ISIS is present in this country. We have to wake up to the reality that Islamofascism is a real danger, and that if we do not become proactive in snuffing it out here in this country, they will attack us more and more, and more innocent civilians will lose their lives. American citizens should not be faced with such dangers. And by attempting to blame firearms for this and to move to strip decent law-abiding American citizens of their fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms would be further weakening the people, depriving them of their ability to defend themselves. But this doesn't seem to cross the mind of the radical extremist left-wingers. They don't care about the well-being of the American people, and this much is obvious from claims like this made by Hillary Clinton.
But we have to also go after the gun lobby.
But we also have to go after the gun lobby. I'm sorry, Hillary, but going after the gun lobby is just going to make America worse off. It is just going to expose decent, hardworking, law-abiding American citizens to ever greater and more ferocious attacks by these Islamofascists, whom your president's policy is to allow even more of them into this country, unfettered and unchecked, just to attack us. Why would we want to strengthen those who are self-avowed enemies of the United States of America and her people? That just is absolutely asinine. It makes no sense whatsoever, and it just goes to show just how dangerous these radical and extremist left-wingers are. I remember that in yesterday's program that I said that this had all of the hallmarks of a radical Islamo-fascist terrorist attack being unfolded on American soil, much like the attacks that occurred in Paris, France, but a few weeks ago. And I have been proven right. Even if the federal government doesn't want to claim it yet, or the salivating mainstream media doesn't want to claim it yet, circumstantial evidence is clearly there, and the facts are clearly there, and the admission of Saeed Farouk's own father that he was a devout Muslim also speaks to this. When you spin the globe and look around the world, do you actually see Christians engaging in this sort of behavior? No. Do you see Jews engaging in this sort of behavior? No. You don't see Hindus engaging in this sort of behavior. You don't see Shintos engaging in this sort of behavior. You don't see Buddhists engaging in this sort of behavior. You don't even see those whacked out Scientologists engaging in this sort of behavior. There is a pattern, as Obama says, but it is not with respect to the so-called readily available or ready access to so-called military-style firearms. That is just a bunch of bunk and malarkey. What we are seeing is that there is this active strain of Islamofascism that is threatening to plunge America into the Dark Ages. And not just America, folks. They are threatening to plunge the entire Western civilized world into this medieval mindset that they have. And really, this medieval mindset is not compatible with any modern civilized society. But because we have taken the poison pill known as political correctness, we are heaving and unable to really discern the truth, because our institutions of higher education, our mainstream media, and our governments have been proactively lying to us. They have been attempting to cover this up. They have been spinning it to try and allow it to fit their radical agenda, but it just isn't true. It doesn't work. And let's pause for a moment and think about this idea of taking away guns from law-abiding citizens. How would that prevent the terrorists from using their pipe bombs to attack us? Because as you have to recall, these terrorists were found to have been creating improvised explosive devices which they would set off with remote control cars within their house. You see, gun control wouldn't stop that. Gun control just would not stop that at all. And that is the type of intellectual disingenuous arguments that are being put forth by the left that just is not based in reality. Then again, none of the arguments that are ever put forward by the radical extreme fringes of left-wing ideology are ever based in reality. As I have oft-time repeated on previous episodes of the Wright Flyer, these radical left-wing ideas and philosophies are based in raw, unadulterated emotionalism, and that is dangerous because it can be used to exploit people to give up their fundamental and unalienable rights for a false sense of security. Folks, it was this very sort of danger that Benjamin Franklin was attempting to warn us about when he said that those who give up liberty for a false sense of security deserve neither liberty nor security and shall surely have neither. He was actually speaking to the sort of danger and ideology that we are seeing espoused by the utopian socialists here in America today. He was mentioning the type of gun-grabbing stance by Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. This is really not the sort of leadership that this country needs, because it is not leadership at all. It is self-aggrandizement and political greed, the likes of which this country has never experienced before, although it has seen it in varying degrees. We have certainly seen it since the time of the Civil War, when Abraham Lincoln was attempting to galvanize federal strength and to deprive the people of their greater access to government, which our founding fathers had developed through the tenets of federalism to be through the state governments wielding more power than the federal government. And we have to remember that the ultimate wielders of sovereignty in the United States are we the people. But that is diametrically opposed to the message that is being spouted off by the likes of Clinton and Sanders and our president. And we just cannot bow down to what they are demanding, because it weakens us as a country, it denies us our fundamental and unalienable rights, and it is diametrically opposed to the fundamental tenets and natural law tenets contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. That is a truth that cannot be denied. It is the ultimate truth that underpins the entire system of government that we have. And therefore, these demands by those who are trying to grab our guns has no place in our society, because it is violative of the supreme law of the land, which you can find in Article 6, Clause 2, which is known as the Supremacy Clause in the United States Constitution, which directly and in no uncertain terms and unequivocally states that the United States Constitution is the supreme law of the land. So by President Obama coming out and demanding that Americans surrender their fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms, this is much akin to what he said when he called ISIS the junior varsity team. Again, these are statements that were not based in reality. They are statements that are detrimental to the country as a whole, and they are diametrically opposed to the natural law tenets contained in our Constitution. Again, folks, if you want to stop Islamofascist terrorism from spreading throughout the United States, you have to embrace your fundamental and unalienable rights, because in this country, it is a duty and responsibility that is coupled with our fundamental and unalienable rights to proactively maintain and safeguard said fundamental and unalienable rights. And that is just a truth that this regime does not want to embrace, does not want to discuss, and does not want to acknowledge. But the thing is, the truth is there. The way that our system works has been plain and apparent for 2 centuries. For as long as the country has existed, we have known this to be true. And then, of course, let's turn to how the president is once again trying to go down the route of calling this workplace violence. The husband and wife team had dropped their toddler off with the grandparents and then proceeded to head to the Inland Regional Center. While it is true that Saeed worked as a restaurant inspector at the facility, this was during a holiday party. I would not call this people being on the facility in their employment capacity. Rather, they were attempting to celebrate the upcoming Christmas holidays. This is supposed to be a time of festivity and joy, but what he was doing is clearly outside the scope of employment by any type of workers' compensation law, by any type of standard legal approach to employment law and the definition of employment, because what he was doing was so far outside the scope of what could even be considered employment that this really can't be considered workplace violence. This is the result of the twisted machination of those that embrace Islamo-fascist doctrine and ideology. But the president doesn't want to admit that because it doesn't fit his radical extremist left-wing goal and ideology. He wants to strip us of our guns, and you can see that he is just frothing at the mouth to attempt to do this. But again, folks, if you remember that this occurred in San Bernardino, California, and also that California has some of the strictest gun control laws in the country, what good is more gun control going to do? How is that going to prevent these so-called refugees from engaging in this type of activity? How is this going to prevent the fact that we already know that there are ISIS members here in the borders of the United States as we speak? You see, this is the type of detachment from reality and derangement that utopian socialists have that pose a truly significant threat to decent, hardworking American citizens throughout the country. Because everything that they have proposed and suggested is out of line and out of touch. And they don't care. They don't want facts to get in the way of their ideology, which they are hell-bent to thrust down the throat of every American citizen. Well, that just isn't true. He and his wife were carrying, at least from reports, fully automatic rifles, at least according to the police. Yet now we have already heard from the media that these firearms were supposedly purchased legally. Now, how can that be, especially in California, where it is extremely difficult to procure firearms at all, and where they have a ban on so-called assault-type weapons? Again, a term that I absolutely loathe and despise because it is so vague and ambiguous. It's just an attempt to once again strip decent, law-abiding American citizens of their fundamental and unalienable rights to keep and bear firearms. And so we also have to keep in mind that if what the media is reporting is true, and I say that with a big if, because a lot of what we have seen with the media is nothing more than idle speculation or an outright attempt to mold this story to fit their radical and extremist left-wing agenda. But to have a so-called fully automatic firearm, you have to have a federal license. and you have to report to the feds all the time, and you are exposed to the most strenuous of background checks. And it would be very difficult for you to get the number of firearms that were alleged to have been used in this case. So again, I am not buying into this drivel put out by the mainstream media, because it just isn't true. Now, maybe they are trying to claim that these semi-automatic guns are actually fully automatic. They have a track record of this, completely obfuscating the truth, completely misrepresenting what these firearms are in an attempt to frighten the people so that they immediately fall into this knee-jerk reaction to support any and all governmental attempts to strip decent law-abiding citizens of their fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms. But again, nothing could be further from the truth. And that is the danger about this mainstream media and this radical Obama regime that you have to look at. Because when you see what they are doing, and you look at the natural law tenets that are contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution, you can see that what Obama is attempting to do is actually far detached and violative of the United States Constitution. Ultimately, what this comes down to is that the media is most likely lying about what type of firearm this is, and are attempting to claim that, you know, people here in the United States can still have ready access to a fully automatic firearm. Now, the difference between a semi-automatic firearm and a fully automatic firearm is, with a fully auto firearm, you just hold the trigger and it fires continuously. You have to individually pull the trigger each time with a semi-auto. But the media doesn't want to actually expose this difference. They don't want to tell the truth because that goes against their radical doctrine. And let's look at just how dangerous this cancerous doctrine of political correct has been. It has actually hampered the quest for justice in this case. A Redlands neighbor of Saeed witnessed several suspicious events, including lots of packages being delivered to the place at odd times at the Farouk residence. Another man who is in the neighborhood saw an increasingly large presence of Middle Eastern men gathering around the Farouk residence. Yet neither of these neighbors reported the incident because they were afraid of being labeled as racists. See, folks, this again is just proof positive of how dangerous the twisted notion and ideology and doctrine of political correctness is. It makes people afraid to be proactive, and it shows that it paralyzes people, and that puts them at significant risk. You know, we have to be able to call a spade, and we have to be able to proactively address the real threats that face us on a daily basis. But because of this cancerous doctrine of political correctness, we see that lives have been lost. So those who advocate this mindless drivel known as political correctness have blood on their hands. They have the blood of innocent American citizens on their hands, and they should be held accountable for it. But we know they won't be, because they will continue to preach the message of banning firearms, as if somehow these inanimate objects are the root cause of all these problems. But going back to how Bernie Sanders claimed that, you know, global warming caused terrorism, we see that they blame abstract notions or inanimate objects for problems, and therefore seek to gain their own power and increase their own power at the expense of the people. Well, again, it's just asinine and completely detached from reality. This is why it is so important that you gain a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution, and thereby your fundamental and unalienable rights. Because then you are able to discern what is the truth, what is not the truth, and what is an actual threat and danger to you. Firearms by themselves are not a threat or danger to you. Islamo-fascist ideology, yes, by itself is absolutely dangerous to you. So basically, what the doctrine of political correctness boils down to is an attack on free speech, and it limits the proactiveness on the part of decent citizens, and mayhem results as a direct consequence therefrom. And this goes in line with something that Attorney General Loretta Lynch and President Obama have said, in that they are still refusing to call this an act of terrorism. Really? I think it's quite evident from the great weight of the evidence that this is President Obama claimed that it could be both workplace violence and terrorism, yet he has refused to admit that it was terrorism. He just admits that it might possibly could be, and attempts to spin the narrative in such a way as to downplay the significant threat of Islamo-fascist terrorism. And then we see that Loretta Lynch also said that she couldn't state that it was terrorism. Yet if you look at what the terrorists had in their possession, it was clear that this is out of line with the other sort of mass shootings that have occurred during 2015. So both of these terrorists wore GoPro cameras to document what they were doing. They both wore so-called tactical clothing. They had improvised explosives. They engaged in a shootout with the police after lingering in the vicinity of the crime for several hours. Now, that is not the same type of thing that we saw with Vester Flanagan. Yes, he used a cell phone to film his shooting, but we didn't see anything with respect to his final moments. And he certainly didn't just linger in the area. He was fleeing for as far away as he could. We didn't see it with Dylan Stormroof, and we didn't see it with the Umpqua Community College shooter. Again, this is just more down the lines of being well-trained, militaristic-style Islamo-fascist terrorism. And I have a feeling that when they were in Saudi Arabia, that they were probably being trained at one of these madrasa-type things or terrorist training camps that are known to exist throughout the Middle East. Again, we have to wake up to the reality of the actual dangers that are currently facing us here in the United States and stop playing these stupid games of semantics and these stupid games of political correctness. We have to pull our heads out of the cloud of man-made global warming and wake up to the fact that it is people driven by this medieval ideology and philosophy that are actually behind the creation and orchestration of terrorism. And until we do that, they will be further emboldened, further empowered, and will not back down from their attempts to strike directly at the heart of the West. Not just the United States, but the entire Western world. And we have certainly seen it with the attacks that unfurled in Paris, France a couple of weeks ago. And the fact that ISIS was out there celebrating this in the immediate aftermath also suggests that these Islamo-fascist terrorists were reaching out to ISIS, or certainly were inspired by ISIS, and that ISIS approved of it. And if that is the case, then we know that ISIS is planning to do more of these sorts of attacks, and I'm afraid we're going to see more of these attacks before the year is out. And so, again, we have to stop and ask ourselves why it is that our government would attempt to take away the very avenue by which we could best defend ourselves against these Islamo-fascist terrorists in the face of this undeniable reality. But that's the thing. Obama, Loretta Lynch, all of these radical extreme left-wingers are attempting to deny reality. It is what they do best. They want to believe in the hoax of global warming, which makes as much sense as saying that global flattening exists. That's why Jeremy and I make that inside joke about the globe deflating every time a penguin explodes because of man's action, and that only socialist policies, which have failed time and again throughout the history of the world, can prevent these sorts of things from happening. Again, It just shows how detached from reality these leftists are. And in fact, they're focusing on the wrong issues. Guns aren't the problem here. The terrorists are alleged to have had fully automatic rifles in their possession. And as I've already pointed out, that is extremely difficult to possess. And it wouldn't matter whether we embraced fully socialized anti-gun laws here in the country, because we could see that the terrorists had access to them in Paris, France, despite France's asinine and overbearing anti-gun laws. So banning guns is not the answer. And in fact, I want to actually go out and applaud the police chief of Detroit, who came out and said that no, depriving decent, law-abiding American citizens of their fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms wouldn't stop terrorism. In fact, he said the reason there hasn't been a terrorist attack in Detroit, which is near that hotbed of Dearborn, Michigan, remember, that's where there is a large population of Muslims, some who must certainly follow this ideology of Islamo-fascist, or certainly encourage it. He said the reason they haven't attacked is because his citizens are armed. Absolutely, the right approach to take has been taken by the leader of the Detroit Police Department, and he should be applauded and congratulated for taking this stance. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and call out to all law enforcement agencies and officials and invite them to take this view, because this is the view that is contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. This is the view that will empower the people to defend themselves and will help prevent these sorts of attacks from occurring in the future. We must annihilate all gun-free zones, and we must empower the citizens to be as safe as they can be, and the way to do that is to empower them to defend themselves. And that is just incredibly important. And of course, we can also see that guns aren't the problem here, because the police also found bomb-making materials in the murderous couple's home. This is very much similar to the Tsarnaev brothers, you know, those Chechnyan Mario brothers, Dzhokhar and Tamerlane, who carried out their attack and murderous rampage in Boston back in 2013. Again, when you look at this, it is clear that what these types of events have in common is the fact that they are adherents of this Islamo-fascist ideology. And unless and until we proactively realize this and admit it and are willing to accept this fact, they are going to continue to be emboldened and empowered and able to carry out these sorts of well-organized, well-orchestrated, well-planned attacks here in the United States. Yet, Michael Balboni, who was the former, or rather is the former, Homeland Security advisor for the New York area, tried to state on Fox News was that these were fully automatic assault-type weapons used by the murderous couple, and that they were supposedly legally purchased, but maybe not by the terrorists. Again, this is the media and government attempting to spin the story to be something that it is not. What it is also is an insult to the intelligence of the decent, law-abiding American citizens. We cannot and will not be able to stop these rampant attacks on our citizenry if we strip law-abiding citizens of their ability to keep and bear firearms. And again, the language in the Second Amendment is quite clear. It says that the right of the people to keep and bear firearms shall not be infringed, period. There is no type of conditioning on that, no restraint against so-called military-type weapons, no restraint on magazine capacity or any of that. This is just the media and the government attempting once again to flex their muscles and to push the true ultimate wielders of sovereignty in this country, we the people, further down. to further subject us to tyranny, despotism, and oppression. Well, enough is enough. The real pattern is there, folks. It is Islamofascism that is the greatest threat to this country right now, and the people are waking up to this reality. Do not allow these potentates and dictators to strip you of your fundamental and unalienable rights. Do not allow them to deny your human decency or your American citizenship. Do not allow them to play into these games of semantics and these dangerous political correct notions which has exposed this country to greater danger. Do not be afraid to be labeled a racist for reporting suspicious behavior like this on the part of people like Saeed, because had they done that, it would have been exposed earlier, and perhaps some lives could have been saved. You're not going to save lives by banning guns. They're still going to access the guns. Criminals don't care about laws. After all, isn't that why we call them outlaws? Because they operate outside of the scope and purview of the law? I seem to think that that is actually the reason why we call them outlaws. Nevertheless, Hillary Clinton still made that campaign speech, which I played earlier, where she said that she will stand up to the gun lobby. Again, what the hell does the so-called gun lobby have to do with Islamofascists engaging in an act of terrorism? This is like her husband ignoring the truth about bin Laden and allowing the World Trade Center bombing of 1993 to go through, and then those Somalian embassy bombings to go through, and he acted in a weak capacity that didn't do anything except expose the true weakness of utopian socialist ideology to those all around the world who want nothing more than the complete and total destruction of our Western culture and society. Folks, we cannot deny that these people loathe and despise our fundamental and unalienable rights. They despise our entire constitutionally endowed representative republic, and they despise our spirit, character, heritage, and national identity. And that is something that they share in common with these radical extremist left-wingers who would stop at nothing to strip and deprive decent law-abiding citizens of their fundamental and unalienable rights. So what we can see is that the gun lobby also has nothing to do with IEDs. And the other thing is that Madame Hillary also supports the president's desire to flood this country with Syrian refugees without vetting them. Folks, I want you to stop and consider this point. Why does the government want to subject law-abiding citizens to much stricter background checks than these people who have a faith with a known track record for committing wanton acts of terrorism? Again, they should have checked in with the idea of the Benghazi attacks being based on a supposed anti-Islamic video. That just isn't true. Again, this story has all of the underpinnings and markers of that kind of event occurring on our soil. And this is directly as a result of the destabilizing policies that Obama has adopted. This whole felonious, or not felonious, but erroneous notion of leading from behind. If you stop and think about that, that is a complete and total oxymoron. But what Obama has done is he has strengthened these people. He has underestimated these people, or what it really comes down to is he is probably secretly encouraging these people. Because why else would he continuously put American interests last? We saw that with the Iranian nuclear deal. While he was out saying that we could make deals with Iran, they were out on social media, their grand mullah, claiming that America was the great Satan and demanding death to America. We have seen that he embraced the Muslim Brotherhood during the Arab Spring of 2011. We have seen that he has further destabilized Libya. And now in Iraq, The Iraqis are claiming that they have seen American forces supporting ISIS. Now, I don't think that American forces have been out supporting ISIS, but I do believe that the president has certainly gone out of his way to give them aid and comfort, has gone out of his way to be completely incompetent with his handling of the situation, and that we have been made exceptionally less safe as a direct result of his actions. And this is the sort of undeniable truth that we have to be, cognizant of. Because when you stop and think about all that has happened, this has done nothing but encourage our enemies. It has done nothing but embolden them, and now they have carried out an attack on our soil. And I don't care how the mainstream media attempts to obfuscate this or spin it, and I don't care how Obama's regime attempts to hide the truth about it. You can see the facts for yourself. You can see the undeniable pattern that is there. You can see that they are trying to hide it under this foolish claim of workplace violence, like they did with Major Nadal Hassan back in Fort Hood. These are undeniable truths, and it really does raise the significant question: why does Obama care more about so-called Syrian refugees than allowing the American people to have the best abilities to defend themselves from these known groups that are out to cause mass carnage and chaos? These are serious questions. Serious questions which the mainstream media won't answer. They just won't. And, the radical left-wing agenda is placing all Americans at significant risk. They want to punish American citizens for the actions of Islamofascists. Think about it, folks. They want to strip you of your fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms due to the actions of somebody who has certainly not embraced American cultures and ideology. They certainly follow a foreign and alien doctrine of faith in which they think that their false moon god calls upon them to kill those who are non-believers. They attacked a peaceful gathering, and yet they showed no signs of this in the past. This is because Islam and Sharia law are developed in such a way as to encourage that sort of behavior. And we have to wake up to that reality if we are going to preserve our way of life, if we are going to preserve our civilization and culture, if we are going to preserve our fundamental and unalienable rights. We must become proactive, and we must not back down from the reality because somebody might get offended. You know what offends me more than any of this? It's the fact that these people could have been stopped, but weren't, because people were afraid due to the way that this poisonous doctrine of political correctness has corrupted the soul of our country. And blame for that can fall squarely on the shoulders of the mainstream media, squarely on the shoulders of the Obama regime, squarely on the shoulders of Hillary Clinton, squarely on the shoulders of any and all of these radical extremist left-wingers who are hell-bent on destroying our way of life. And there's another interesting thing about this. The Council on American Islamic Relations, also known as CAIR, got the Farouk family in front of the cameras of the salivating mainstream media in a quick hurry. It was as though they were attempting to do damage control for the family. This is where the family came out and tried to say that they never could have imagined that their lovely little Saeed and his wife would go out and, perpetrate these wanton, horrible acts of terrorism. But I'm sorry, folks. This is just an undeniable pattern, something that has been seen time and again. And it brings back to my memory the fact that there was this protest in Paris where of the city's 224,000 Muslim population, or approximately that much, only 30 showed up in support of condemning the attacks in Paris. Folks, the silence of the majority of the Muslim populations around the world speaks volumes about what they support, what they believe, and whether they are accepting viewpoints that are compatible with the United States Constitution, and whether they have indeed truly assimilated into our society and culture. But they're going to go out of their way to try and make this feel as though they don't feel that way. And that is what CARE is trying to do. Yet it is intellectually disingenuous. I'm sorry, but how could they not know what their family members were doing? How could they not know that he had embraced this Islamo-fascist ideology? Again, something is just off there, folks. And usually when your gut tells you that something is wrong with this type of situation, it is absolutely spot on, absolutely dead on, and absolutely accurate. And again, it just goes to show that the utopian socialist and these radical extremist left-wing ideologues that follow the doctrine and preach the doctrine of political correctness don't want to use profiling, except in the case of American gun owners. Stop and think about that, folks. We can't look at Islamo-fascists because that might be offensive to Muslims. But do we care about offending American gun owners by attempting to strip them of their fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms? Do we care about offending decent, law-abiding American citizens by attempting to completely, fundamentally transform what it is that made their country great? Remember that our founding fathers wholeheartedly believed that the American people would be strong only if they were allowed to keep their fundamental and unalienable rights. And indeed, as George Mason had concluded after drafting the Declaration of Rights for the state of Virginia and later helping draft the Bill of Rights to the United States Constitution, he had concluded that these fundamental and unalienable rights have been endowed to the American citizens by their creator, and that no rightful, legitimate government has the lawful authority to strip, encroach, abridge, belittle, or take away these fundamental and unalienable rights. And that is the message that is lost upon these utopian socialists. They don't believe it because they don't believe in a creator. They don't believe in self-accountability and self-responsibility. They are arrogant to the point that they think they know what's best for each and every one of us, when in fact nothing, absolutely nothing, could be further from the truth. And herein lies the problem, because when you look at what the president and Bernie Sanders and what difference does it make Clinton all support attacking the American citizens' right to keep and bear firearms, I want you to recall something that Niccolo Machiavelli had said in his book, The Prince. He said that when a prince disarms his population, he dishonors them. Thus, the president and Sanders and Clinton are all attempting to dishonor law-abiding American citizens. We should not be asked to surrender our fundamental, unalienable rights, especially when people like Saeed Farouk are at war with us. And, you know, the lies told by the media are completely transparent now. They claim that it is impossible to tell what motivated these people. Folks, it really is not that hard. The Farouks spent time in Saudi Arabia. Saeed's father claimed he was a devout Muslim. They were constructing the same type of IEDs that were utilized by terrorist groups against our servicemen and women overseas. Is this really that difficult to comprehend? Is this really that difficult to piece together? No. The evidence is clearly there. It is clearly there for everyone to see what it is that these people believe in, what it is these people advocate for, what it is these people are trying to push through. And yet our government is being willfully obtuse to it. And not just the government, the lapdog, salivating mainstream media is also being intentionally, willfully blind to the great weight of the evidence that is there before them. It doesn't take a genius to figure this out, because I am certainly no genius. And you know, when Obama says there's a pattern with so-called mass shootings and is attempting to politicize this for so-called common sense gun regulations, again, he's being intellectually disingenuous. There is a pattern, all right, as I have stated already. And that pattern with this incident is as follows. Islamofascists have declared war on the United States. ISIS has gone to social media to celebrate this terrible event when it was still unfolding. Like the Tsarnaevs, the Farouks targeted Americans simply for the fact that they aren't Islamic. They planned their attack methodically and did so in the name of Islam. So from 9/11 to Major Nadal Hassan, to the Chechnyan Mario brothers, to the Farouk-Yus, there is one common thread. They are all devout followers of the Prophet of the Sword and practice the so-called religion of peace. This is the elephant in the room that the mainstream media doesn't want to touch with a 10-foot pole. This is what President Obama is attempting to tap dance around. This is what the FBI is afraid to proclaim. This is what Loretta Lynch doesn't want you to know. But folks, all you have to do is look at the plain evidence that is clearly there. The circumstantial evidence and the direct evidence are such that you can draw no other logical conclusion other than to state that what is happening right now is an example of Islamofascist terrorism on the soil of the United States again, just like it was Islamofascist terrorism that erupted at Fort Hood, just like it was Islamofascist terrorism that erupted at the 2013 Boston Marathon. The pattern is there. And it is not the decent, law-abiding American citizens' fundamental right to keep and bear firearms that has caused this outrageous attack on decent, law-abiding citizens. The common denominator between all of this is Islamofascism. It is the so-called religion of peace. And we cannot turn away from that. We cannot deny that, because they're certainly not denying it. So why on earth do the political powers that be and this salivating mainstream media go out of their way to obfuscate the truth, go out of their way to push the American people down, to strip them of their fundamental and unalienable rights? The answer to that is they have this radical, extremist, left-wing agenda that they cannot break away from. And the gutless opposition party, or GOP, has been going along right with them, giving them everything they want, refusing to stand up for the people that they supposedly represent. So, what is the other pattern that we see with respect to these cases? Well, it is that the doctrine of political correctness has blinded the people to the truth. Absolutely has blinded the people to the truth of what is happening. The media and the government are bending over backwards to accommodate these Islamofascists. We can see that they already give them preferential treatment to the American citizens. We can see that the Obama administration is already going out and claiming that the governments of the several states do not have the authority to prevent these Syrian refugees, all who are adherents to the Sunni faith, which is the same faith upon which ISIS is primarily based, into this country. that they are even going so far as to challenge in a court of law the governor's abilities to prevent this, and they are doing so in an arrogant and gleeful fashion, as if they want to bring about this untold pain and suffering, these attacks of terrorism on the American people. And we see that they don't want to admit the truth about it, and that they want to blame gun-owning American citizens for these wanton acts of terrorism instead. Folks, the truth is there to be seen, and the truth will set you free, but you know that the truth also hurts. And the truth is that right now, the media and the government is not acting in your best interests, and they have not been for a long time. The truth is that this insane, self-destructive, suicidal doctrine of political correctness is exposing us all to greater and greater risks and dangers. And the truth is that the mainstream media will never expose this until it's too late. And by that point, the Islamo-fascists will have engaged in some horrific attack, the likes of which this nation has never seen before, unless we become proactive, unless we start demanding that they tell the truth, and demanding that our governments at all levels start strictly adhering to the natural law tenets contained within the four corners of our shared Constitution. Again, folks, by embracing the Constitution and by developing a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of that Constitution, and thereby your fundamental and unalienable rights, you are empowered to defend yourself. You are empowered to put an end to this mindless crap that these radical extremist left-wing ideologues and Islamo-fascists are attempting to thrust down our throat. And you know, you can see it with the hypocrisy, with the way in which the mainstream media and the Obama regime don't take the same stance with respect to gun-owning citizens. You know, they go out of their way to say that not all Muslims are like that, but you never hear them say that with respect to gun-owning Americans. You never hear them say that with respect to people who want to support, preserve, and adhere to the natural law tenets contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. You know, they don't take the same stance with Christians either. In fact, the New York Daily News has attacked those who called for prayer for the victims in the immediate aftermath of this shocking act of terrorism. Think about that, folks. They came out and they said that God will not fix this. That was what was on the headline. And what they were trying to insinuate is that we need to adopt these so-called common sense gun control measures to make the country safe. How would that stop pipe bombs? How would that stop these Islamo-fascist terrorists from carrying out their malicious deeds on our soil? It wouldn't. Why isn't the New York Post speaking out as vociferously against Obama's plan to dump a bunch of Sunni Syrian so-called refugees on our soil? Why are they not vociferously standing up for the best interests of the ultimate wielders of sovereignty in the United States, we the people? Well, the answer is clear, because it goes against their ideology. It goes against their Goebbels propaganda style ideology, doctrine, and plan. See, they just cannot divorce themselves from their radical ideology. They cannot bring themselves to see that they are wrong. Well, I'm here to tell you they are wrong, and that they are putting each and every one of us in extreme danger. We should not bow to them, we should not capitulate to them, and we should acknowledge the fact that there can be no question that these radical left-wing extremists are just as dangerous as these Islamo-fascist terrorists. In fact, they may even be more dangerous because what they actually do is encourage and empower these people to carry out the dastardly sorts of terrorist attacks that they have orchestrated on our soil. And then they try to lie about it. And then they try and say that it is not clear what motivated these people. Folks, the pattern is undeniable. It has been seen before. And they are being dishonest. They are lying to us. And I am sick and tired of it, just as I am sure most of you are sick and tired of it. But remember, we must not surrender our fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms in response to this senseless act of terror. We must hold our government accountable, meaning we should not let in these so-called Syrian refugees. We should demand that our government strictly adhere to the United States Constitution, and we cannot waver in our resolve. Because if we waver in our resolve, and if we back down in the face of these Islamo-fascist terrorists, then we are giving them the victory that they crave. We are giving them everything they want, and we are undermining our own natural law principles and our own identity. Folks, the very lifeblood of this country is at threat. And if we continue to approach this as if it's the status quo, then we've got a serious problem. You know, Obama came out and said that it should not be an accepted norm that gun violence happens in this country. Wrong. Gun violence is not the natural course. That's him trying to obfuscate. That's him lying, twisting the truth. Violent crime is actually down in the United States. What we should not allow to become the natural course of events here in the United States, and what would definitely become the natural course of events here in the United States if we allowed unvetted Syrian so-called refugees into our borders, is terrorist attacks. That is the stark reality of it that Obama does not want to admit. That is the true nature of things, and that is what is really standing out as a staggering threat to decent, hardworking American citizens. We cannot allow this government to insult us by disarming us. Niccolo Machiavelli was absolutely right when he mentioned that in The Prince. And therefore, what we must do, what we have no choice about, is embracing our Constitution. And therefore, we must, absolutely must, have a fluent working knowledge and understanding of our shared Constitution and our fundamental and unalienable rights. And with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your Captain Randy Wright, and as always, I want to thank you for flying with us here at the Wright Flyer today, and I invite you to leave comments and concerns either here on our YouTube page, or on our Facebook page, or our Google Plus page. Once again, we also invite you to join us the next time that Jeremy and I hit the friendly airwaves, and look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you again for flying the Wright Flyer. See you next time.